Hello, everyone. Welcome to Oasis, and we are happy to have you here as we gather and take a little bit of time to connect with one another at different points throughout the year. We are very happy to have Pastor Paul Drees with us. I'll introduce him in just a moment, but wanted to welcome you all here. It's can be tough and lonely being a leader of young people in our churches, and so we know that some of the key points of the ELC Youth Ministry Network is for us to connect and renew and to learn. So we want to do that in this way. Those of you who couldn't make it with us, we're going to be recording, so you'll see us on a recording perhaps down the road. But we're going to have, just want to share a few announcements from the ELCA on behalf of the ELCA Youth Ministry Network. And I'll be happy to introduce our speaker here and we can get moving on. But first a prayer. Let us pray. Gracious God, as we gather to touch base with one another and to learn and to be educated and to connect with one another, we ask that you bless our time here this evening, that we could learn what it means to be a public witness to the gospel in many different ways, but also in the use of technology and digital spaces. We are there. How do we deal with this in a way that is helpful and constructive and puts you at the center, while also engaging folks and to be one with each other as one great community. We ask that you be with us this evening in our time together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Excellent. Thank you. A couple of housekeeping notes. We are going to record the webinar. We'll share it with you who are ELCA Youth Network members. If you're not a member, we invite you to join the ELCA Youth Ministry Network. We are excited that the extravaganza is coming up in 2027, January 22 to 25, 2027 at the Hilton in Minneapolis. As it is a youth gathering year, we expect that folks will have a great opportunity to sort of get used to the city a little bit, find out key places to visit or transit, what all that looks like. So we'll be sure to share a link with you. There's been one dropped in the chat already, so thank you for that. And I want to point you to a couple other things. The ELC Youth Ministry Network continues to put forth Third Tuesday Conversations, a podcast. We invite you to check that out online and wherever you get your podcasts. We also have the Connect Journal. Those issues are coming out regularly, so we ask for you to connect, pun intended, with our Connect Journal so that you can do a little bit of learning, a little bit of growing. This summer, there are several ELCA Youth Gathering expeditions. So we invite you to check out the Youth Gathering social media and figure out where there might be an expedition near you, sort of a way to prep yourselves for the youth gathering, to see what to anticipate coming together with thousands of folks from across the ELCA. And last but not least is Martin's List. We have a great wealth of resources, and that comes from all of you. You who have been practitioners of youth ministry, you know what it's like to have to put together a slideshow or a Jeopardy type game for your young ones, or a skit, or taking a scripture and making it into a Bible study, or checking out previous extravaganza workshops that have been recorded. Lots and lots of good information out there. Would love for you as an ELC Ministry Network member to access then Martin's List, and then just search away and dig into some of those resources. Again, it's you that has these gifts, and you keep giving, and it's great, and we share and we use and we give credit, and it's a wonderful blessing. So check out Martin's List. Finally, we do have various videos on our YouTube channel, so please check out the ELC Youth Ministry Network YouTube channel. The most recent editions you'll see on our social media being shared about what brings joy to being a youth minister and a couple other types of questions like that. Those are being rolled out all the time. But then also on our YouTube channel, you can access the Extravaganza 2026 speakers, their talks, whether it's the Bible studies or main stage speakers, other things that have happened at the Extravaganza. Go check it out. There's there's a ton of videos from Extravaganza 2026. Would love for you to see those on our YouTube channel. So thank you. There's all the chats for those of you who are on here. The chat has all the links. And again, we'll follow up with an email with all these links for you as well, so you can access all this information. All right. I think that is enough of that for now, but I would love to take a moment now to introduce our speaker for the day, Pastor Paul Drees. And I am going to very awkwardly try to find where the bio is that he sent to me. I just need a second. He really needs, if you're a fan of TikTok, he needs no introduction. You may have seen him there. And he has a wonderful gift for being able to share these deep theological questions. Um, just like, well, I'm not going to, you have to go look at his last video. I'll just leave it there. But it has to do with a wonderful gift of baptism. But he has, over the last year, reached 1 million followers on TikTok. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all the channels. Is all that combined, over 1 million, and it's quite amazing to have such a public witness. And he is an ELCA pastor, creates content for social media, and his videos have been seen by over 200 million, or have been seen over 200 million times. It's quite an accomplishment, quite a feat, and he's got over 1 million followers, as I mentioned. His focus, the liberation of Christ, and how that applies to our whole lives. And so, from La Crosse, Wisconsin area, lives with his wife Anna. I'll leave it at that. Pastor Paul, welcome. We're so glad to have you with the Oasis.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Michael. That's a great introduction. So, as I'm talking, feel free to put any questions or comments that you have in the chat. I'm used to reading frantic chats as I am going because I go on live on TikTok every Monday night for like the last 4.5 years. So I always like seeing the chat and people having questions. So I wanted to, when I was invited to do this, I was kind of thinking about what could I offer, right? A lot of y'all have more experience in youth ministry than I do, right? I've been serving as a pastor for 6.5 to 7 years now. So I have certainly some experience, but not a ton of youth ministry specific experience. But the question that I wanted to wrestle with is how I've been able to hit a relative amount of success on social media and why that hasn't translated into my churches increasing. So kind of examining where that disconnect is and seeing what lessons that might bring for all of us, right? Serving those of us serving in churches, those of us serving in churchwide and elsewhere. So the last 2 years, like I said, like Michael said, have been really good for me on social media. It's been a joy. I've hit 1 million followers, which is not something I ever expected when I started in January of 2021. And it's been wonderful. And actually in May, so May 17th, I'm going to be transitioning to serving as a public theologian full time. So I'm leaving my parish ministry. We've had that announced for just over a month now in the call. So I'm very, very excited for that. And yet, during these last 2 years, as this has been growing more and more, I've been serving as a 3/4 time pastor for 2 rural churches. And during this time, neither of these churches have really grown. Some members have stepped away, mostly for some political differences, and some new members have come, but they've stayed about at the same level. And so my success on social media has not had a significant impact on the congregations that I serve. And I say this to recognize the reality. Though I've figured out how to grow on social media for one way or another, I haven't yet figured out how to translate that into growing a congregation. So I'm not going to pretend like I have some sort of brand new idea that you haven't already tried. Like I said, a lot of you probably have more experience in this than I do. But what I have been able to figure out is how to reach people who have a sense of curiosity. And presenting them with theology, I think, is pretty basic, right? This is stuff I was taught in confirmation, not anything there's no like Gnostic wisdom that I'm providing to people. Everything that I share is pretty basic Lutheran theology. So I spend a lot of time working in my videos, but people have a deep curiosity about this sense of Lutheran identity. And so this is what I want to explore with you, this kind of paradox. People are very interested in what I have to say, but I would say what progressive Christians have to say. And mainline churches, even progressive mainline churches, are still, for the most part, shrinking. So I want to cover this topic in kind of three different parts. So the 3 parts that I have are, first, how we lost the culture war around Christianity. The second is why and how progressive Christian creators have been able to have some substantial success despite point number one. And then third, what our churches can do about all of this. So first, how we lost the war. I know we in the ELCA don't like using the language of violent rhetoric. We don't like using that language of warfare, but for better or worse, I would say this is the reality that we are in. If you know anybody who grew up in a conservative or evangelical church, they probably have a story about what those churches, those conservative and or evangelical churches, have said about our mainline churches. They're often taught that mainline churches utterly failed to follow the gospel, that our continued decline is some sort of divine decree, or that mega churches or evangelical churches or conservative churches, depending whomever they belong to, have been appointed by God to carry on the gospel. There's a very famous YouTuber. He has, I think, 600,000 followers. I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head. Oh, Redeemed Zoomer is his name. But he started something called Operation Reconquista, which is his mission to reconquer the mainline churches with conservative values. So this, if you're familiar with the Reconquista movement, this is not a peaceful movement. Now I've spoken with him. He's a good guy, but yeah, we don't like to use this violent language, but this violent language is being used towards us for better or worse. And I think I owe a lot of my success to this reality. Simply seeing a person wearing a collar and also like having a pride flag in the background is very strange for the vast majority, or maybe not the vast majority, but certainly a majority of the US population. When I say that we've lost the culture war, it's not that evangelical churches or mega churches have stolen away our members with music and sermon series. It's more that a majority of the people in the United States literally have no idea that we exist. Our own members in our own churches tend to spew evangelical talking points despite being baptized, confirmed, living their entire lives within ELCA churches. And I'll admit, this is one of the most disheartening things for me when I entered into my first call. I was ready to speak to a congregation about Jesus, about his message of justice and compassion and liberation and how that still applies to us. And I had all my talking points ready, my Bible passages ready to cite, but it seemed like I didn't really have much of an impact. Later, I figured out some of that is based on trust, right? The longer that you're in a place, the more trust that you're able to build. But members in my church who were born and raised in the ELCA were spewing evangelical rubbish about salvation, about baptism, about salvation, about giving your soul to Jesus, and similar points about the Bible. Even in the congregation that I'm serving right now, there's been some discussion about the American flag in the sanctuary and figuring out, and some discussion back and forth about the theology behind that. And I'm trying to argue for kind of what I would view as a pretty typical mainline perspective and running into some resistance around that, partially because of this kind of the evangelical ethos that has seeped into all of our churches. We've seen our own members spew talking points that they've heard in the broader Christian culture, a conservative and evangelical dominated Christian culture. So I do have two books if you want to dive into this more, people who've studied this much more than I have. The first one is Jesus and John Wayne, which I'm sure y'all have heard of before, by Kristen Kobes Demez. Fantastic book. And then the second one by a friend of mine, who I'm sure y'all also know. This is Disciples of White Jesus by Angela Danker. These are kind of these two books kind of showed me that one, we are at war, and two, we lost. Like we lost a while ago, unfortunately. And I'm sure many of you have heard stories like this where you hear youth or parents say something and you're wondering, where did they get that from? I didn't teach them that. I know none of the other pastors who came before me taught them that. And I don't want to blame anybody for this reality, but I think this is the reality that we have lost this kind of culture war that is existing in the broader sphere. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner we're able to rebuild and reconfigure ourselves. So when your members ask, why aren't young people coming to church, which is a constant ask for us, those of us serving as pastors, I think this is part of it, right? I kind of put potential members, so potential new members, into three different categories. The first are people in your communities who have been taught that mainline churches are fundamentally evil or misguided or both. And maybe they've stepped away from their evangelical or conservative church, but they still hold those kind of notions of mainline churches that we don't know what we're doing effectively, because that's what they were taught growing up. The second group of people would be people in our communities who maybe didn't grow up in any sort of church, but have no knowledge that a Lutheran understanding of the gospel is even possible. They have no conception of what that would be. They look at the church and wonder if it's still open, right? I've run into people in Trempolo in my church, which is a town of I think like 1,800 people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I didn't know that church was still like running or something." Like it's just so this is the second group. They literally do not know that we exist. The third group is people who are familiar with your church, but for whatever reason, the church doesn't meet their needs. Maybe they find it boring. Maybe they have some sort of soccer tournaments or something going on during that time, but it doesn't meet their needs for one reason or another. And these are, again, I don't really like the language of war. I'm not trying to destroy anybody, but these are the potential soldiers that we have in our war, and they're mostly standing on the sidelines. And the our opponents in this war continue to marshal their resources and continue to say all sorts of nasty things about us while we kind of stand idly by, for better or worse. Now, when one engages in warfare, one does not have to engage in total war, right? I don't want to destroy evangelical churches. I'm sure there's a lot of evangelical churches that have brought a lot of faith formation and a lot of beauty for people, and they've been a means of support. So I don't want to destroy evangelical churches. I don't want to destroy conservative churches. I don't want to destroy non-denominational churches, but I do want our church to survive. I do want our theology to survive because I think we offer something that's incredibly important for people these days. And for better or worse to survive, we kind of have to take up arms in this metaphor. So that's kind of the war that we lost. I know that's a downer. That's not a very fun thing to talk about. So my apologies. I promise the rest of it gets better, but that's kind of the war that we've lost. The second idea is why and how progressive Christian creators have been having substantial success despite all of that, despite this war being lost, that kind of understanding that exists in the common culture. And first, I just want to name about why, kind of a little bit of my story, right? About why I started posting on social media. I started posting on social media because I would go to a friend's party in the Twin Cities. People would ask what I did, and then I'd spend the next 10 minutes explaining how you can be Christian, but you can also view queer people as beloved by God, right? And that I don't have to view queer people as anathema if I am a Christian. This is the way many of my conversations went. Anytime I was meeting new people, this was when I was at parties, right? When I was going on bike rides, when I was at my high school and my college reunion, I had conversations about this. Almost every single element of my life, I had to kind of justify my existence or explain why the way that I am doing church is not the way that people are used to. And these conversations would usually happen and then take up the rest of my night. So partially I did it out of annoyance that I was tired of having these conversations. And I thought, let me just like settle this in one place at one time. And at the time, I didn't use that language of progressive Christianity. And I kind of talked about compassionate Christianity, but I found that label of progressive Christianity to be incredibly useful to distance myself from a sort of conservative Christianity. Not when I use that word progressive, I'm not referring to a political stance, but more just a theological stance. So it's been helpful for me. Everybody is welcome to use their own terminology and what works for them. But when I use that, it provides some space for people to have some curiosity, right, about what's going on. So I start my journey on social media in 2018. I started posting on YouTube, on a YouTube channel entitled Theology in 60 Seconds. I did 23 of these videos that were all theology in under 60 seconds, and nobody watched them. And so I just gave up. So that's as I was reading that, as I was going back through this, preparing the script, I had kind of forgotten that I had done this for like 9 months, that I had spent recording these YouTube videos trying to explain how like God is loving towards people and how they just didn't go anywhere. They're still online. You can find them if you look really hard. But so I gave up on that and thought, all right, I guess it's not for me. And graduated seminary, went to Granite Falls, Minnesota, which is a population of 2,800, about 2.5 hours from the nearest city, and kind of had that same problem again, where I would speak to people in bars, I would speak to people as I'm walking along the street, and we would have these same conversations that I was having. While that was happening, George Floyd was murdered, and this is a period of great upheaval. This is during the COVID pandemic, right? And there's a lot of political polarization and a lot of nasty things that were coming out of I would say the kind of the Christian right. And I just felt this call again that this is something that I have to get involved in. This is something that I have to do something about. So kind of out of a sense of desperation, also after getting into trouble a few times for what I was preaching about. I started posting on social media again. I started posting on TikTok thinking I was too late to the trend, right? Like TikTok had already come and gone and I wasn't going to but I felt like this need to do it. And unlike YouTube, where I posted for 9 months, had no success, I had almost immediate success. I had millions of views within 3 months of posting my first video, which is kind of a combination of the COVID pandemic and a lot of luck. Those two things put together. But this is kind of where I first noticed that crux of our conversation of the topic that I'm wanting to bring to you today, that my videos had millions of views, but I couldn't convert them into membership in the church. This is partially because I didn't name the church I was working at, right, out of a sense of privacy and for the members, partially because it was very rural, partially because of some animosity between certain parties within the church. But I think a better explanation of this phenomenon is this: churches and social media creators attract followers in very different ways. The power of social media is that I am very unthreatening on social media, right? I'm wearing a collar, I've got my background, but people can scroll away at any point if they want. If they don't want to see me again, they never have to see me again. And I have no idea who they are. This is kind of a low trust relationship, right? Church, however, is the exact opposite. If you go to a church and you don't like what the pastor says, you walk out, there's a substantial risk that you're going to be noticed, that someone in town might come up and ask you about why you left. Maybe they're going to harass you. This kind of experience isn't that common, but it certainly is in the zeitgeist. There's kind of this expectation that if you go to a church, you don't like it, you're kind of stuck there for the remainder of the time, and then you have to dodge church members for the rest of your life who are going to try and hunt you down and bring you back into church. So enough people have had this negative experience of Christianity that it's kind of viewed, sorry, I know my video just went out. It's kind of viewed as very risky to go to a church. And I have had a lot of conversations with people where they're interested in what I have to say, but they are scared to go to a church because of a past experience they have, because of their own anxiety, but they can't quite bridge that gap. So yes, we definitely need content creators. I think we need many more content creators within the ELCA, and I have a great desire to do some of that work. If any of you know people who would be interested in getting together people for that, I would absolutely love to train in other people on how to do this work. I think we need at least a dozen of people doing this. It can't just be me and Knothead, who's like this pastor out in this ELCA pastor. I'm forgetting where he is. I think he's in Tennessee or something like that. And he doesn't really post that much recently, but there's like two ELCA pastors on social media now, and Ian McConnell is on, and Jenny Sung is also on, and they're both fantastic, but it's not a primary focus of their ministry in that way. So if we want to have any hope for survival, right, we have to kind of get our sales funnel. And I hate that I'm talking about sales funnels with y'all, but it's the best analogy that we have, right? So we have the top of the sales funnel. Kind of this is like the public creators, right? These are the content creators. These are the people who have books. They are the ones who get to go on large news outlets, right? This is the top of the funnel. And we kind of have the bottom of the funnel, which are like a bunch like worship services and Bible studies and Sunday school and that kind of stuff. And we need to figure out how we can kind of build that middle of the funnel, start to build trust, meet people in the areas that they are already, especially in their communities, because people are hungry for a theology rooted in compassion. When I started posting, I kind of thought like, oh, no one's gonna want to listen to what I have to say. But it seems like people have had a lot of curiosity about it. People are hungry for a theology that's rooted in compassion, one that centers Christ, not some sort of human power structure. So this is why myself and a lot of other progressive Christian content creators have been able to gather a large following, because there is a deep hunger for this. Though maybe we have lost the cultural war around perception, people are very hungry to hear this kind of message. Again, a message I would say you could probably get at almost any ELCA church. There's nothing really that I'm saying that is all that special. It's just people don't get it one way. They're not able to hear it in the same way, and they don't always have trust for churches and for institutions. So 3 is kind of, we have this war. Here's one method we've been using to kind of fight against the public perception of Christianity and of mainline Christianity and Lutheranism. And what can our churches actually do about this? I wouldn't actually recommend most people become content creators. It's it's difficult and grueling and amazing in all sorts of ways, but you have to like really want to do it. It's one of those things where if people are going to do it regardless, like those are the people that I want doing it, not people who feel like, I really ought to do more content creation on the side. Like you can do some, but I wouldn't recommend going into it as a career. You need to really want it. But all of our churches have something that we can do kind of about this. So I'm going to present this paradigm to you. I want you to try and pick apart this paradigm simply because I'm good at understanding how social media works. Doesn't mean that I'm good at like church sociology or kind of like how all of these different factors are coming together. However, I do have some thoughts. Like I said, we certainly need to increase the number of the low risk evangelism, that widest part of our sales funnel. We also are doing a lot of this high risk evangelism. So that's like the absolute bottom of the sales funnel. So like Bible studies and worship services and small groups and stuff like that is absolutely fantastic. Sunday school, youth trips, the youth gatherings are fantastic, but that's like a huge ask for somebody, right? Like to go from, hey, the way I categorize these kind of things, these are great activities if you trust somebody already. If you trust somebody already, then you can invite them to a worship service, right? But if they don't trust you at all and you just say, hey, come to this worship service, like a lot of people just won't come. There's a level of anxiety that we didn't used to have, unfortunately. So this is where we need to start building in kind of these medium risk, this middle part of the sales funnel. These are kind of things that we might be able to engage with where people can build some sense of trust with the churches so they can better understand what we're like, right? That they're not going to be harmed in these spaces. So we kind of need to build this out. There are some things I will say that the church can do at that kind of low risk, the highest part of the sales funnel. There are some things that the church can do. The example that comes to mind for me was every church that I've been in has done a cookie giveaway in the community. So usually around Christmas time, we recruit bakers to make thousands of cookies, as many cookies as they possibly can. And then what we do is we put them in bags and we just give them out in the community. And it used to be targeted towards members, and now I've just decided, no, we're just going to give them out to anybody we possibly can. And I've really enjoyed that particular I've enjoyed that particular ministry. It's because it engages four different groups in a really valuable way. First, the bakers who feel like maybe not aren't comfortable speaking to their neighbor about Christ, about their faith. They might not be comfortable with that, but they do feel very comfortable baking cookies and knowing that these cookies are going to be sent out to members in their community, to random strangers they might never meet. The second are confirmation students in this setting. They get to practice their faith, right? They get to go out and feed people, something that Christians have been doing for thousands of years, something that Jesus himself tells us to go out and do. The third is left-leaning churches do a really good job of engaging women than they do men. And so this actually gives something for the men in the congregation who are often like parents or like people who are just wanting to help out. It gives them like a tangible task of something that they can do, right? So I found this is actually a good way to engage the men in the congregation as well, who are often very looking for something objective that they can accomplish. So this is something you can hand to them and say, hey, just drive these kids around for for an hour and then bring them back at the end. And then fourth, this is a good thing for the community itself. Everybody likes free cookies. No, none of these people have to talk to anybody. We are not putting like chick tracks in your in your cookie bag. It's just like a very simple invitation. Hey, we are doing this because Jesus told us that we're supposed to care for our neighbor, right? This is a part of our basic duty as Christians. If you're interested, we have a Christmas service if you'd like to join. So that's kind of a low risk evangelism opportunity. I'm sure many of you have engaged in kind of similar practices and have figured out how do we reach out to people? What are low risk ways that we can reach out to people so that they know that we exist, right? So in this kind of paradigm, right, we have high risk, we have low risk, low risk, medium risk, and high risk. We do a great job of finding those high risk things. We've been building out those kind of low risk things, and we just need to figure out what are these kind of medium risk, this middle part of the sales funnel. The example that immediately came to mind was when I started giving out ashes out in front of the middle school. And that's because my students specifically asked if I could give them ashes at the school. And this is like the night before, and I was just like, okay, sure, yeah, I guess we can make it work. So I reached out to the school, let them know, like, hey, I'm happy to leave the second you ask me to leave. I'm not going to be I'm not going to be a pain or make any sort of fuss or anything like that. And I get there, I speak to the school administrator. He's like, oh, yeah, it should be fine. And then 10 minutes later, a parent complains and I have to leave. So, not a good idea. I understand why the school administrator asked me to leave. There was a parent who complained about it. I wasn't talking to any kids that weren't my students, but kids kids were asking me for ashes, and it was really hard for me theologically to say to them, no, I'm not going to give you ashes. I'm only going to give them to my members. So there's a better way I could have executed that. But things in the community, right? Like where people see you, where people are going to engage with you. This is as simple as, like, I know pastors who coach teams, right? Like they are going out and they're coaching their small, like, middle school basketball team or something like that, or figuring out other ways to help out. I drop off groceries every week for students at the local elementary school for a backpack program. And so the students will often see me walking into the elementary school with my collar on as I am just handing off these groceries. And it's just a way that we can start to build those connections. I'd be very curious if any of y'all have any thoughts about kind of these medium, what this middle part of the sales funnel is. I think these kind of things come a little more naturally after you've been in a community for a while, but you want a lot of touch points, right? So I'm working on the high part, this high part, although that's not really for every single church. Some churches can engage in that, some don't have the capacity to engage in that. But this kind of middle part of that, this is where we give people opportunities to become comfortable with us, where they don't have to come into the church body. They don't have to come into the church itself. That's actually a really intimidating experience for a lot of people. For me, not a problem. I can go into any ELCA church anywhere in the world. Well, not anywhere in the world because we're in America, but like anywhere, any ELCA church I can go into and I will feel pretty comfortable there. I got a taste of this when I actually went into one of the largest Baptist churches and realized, oh, this is probably what it's like for people coming into an ELCA church where they're unfamiliar, they're a little worried, they're thinking, is someone going to come and try and speak to me in this time? So if you pastors very rarely and youth workers very rarely have the opportunity to do this, but it is a good exercise to just go to a church in a denomination that isn't ours and just get the experience of what it feels like in that moment, that anxiety and that fear. And you start to understand, oh, this is why people don't make that gap. So we need to give people opportunities to get comfortable with us as a church. A church is like any institution. It has to meet somebody's needs or it's eventually going to die. And since we figured out that we've decided that we are not going to use hell as a as a threat to hang over people's heads, we have to figure out how we can meet people's needs, how we can engage in our communities to meet those particular needs. And this is what allows other people to see the purpose of church. Our churches aren't just about survival. Our churches are actually about improving the community around us. That's, I think, a much more compelling vision for somebody than just, hey, do you want to join the church? We need to replace our roof. Like, we do need to replace the roof. That is a brutal reality. Like, the church needs to be somewhere. And yet, that's not a super compelling evangelism strategy to say we need you because we need your money, but rather we need you because we are trying to make the world itself better, or we need you because we are running this after school program and we need people to help out with it, right? It's figuring out more ways that we can connect within our communities, engaging in kind of that middle part of the funnel. So I don't think any of this is necessarily some sort of like magic fix, or there's any sort of formula, because like that's I don't know, that's would be a little braggadocious of myself to try and say that I have mastered anything, especially with my experience that I have. But I do think there is something here, that there is a deep hunger for churches that can engage people, and there's a deep desire for people that people have for community. But for better or worse, people just are not as comfortable coming into church on Sunday mornings anymore. They're scared of it. They hear all of the stories, horror stories from their friends, maybe stories of themselves growing up in church, and they say, I don't want any part of that. That doesn't feel like something that I want to even risk being a part of. But if we can figure out ways that we build trust within our local communities, right? Figuring out how do we root ourselves, how do we find what the community needs and meet that need, then I think we can see that their joining us has an actual purpose, right? That for better or worse, we're going to be playing catch up with this within the ELCA, and most mainline churches, all of mainline churches are going to be playing catch up with this, but there are people in our communities who would really benefit from our theology, a theology that's rooted in compassion, a theology that's rooted in grace, in this deep Lutheran understanding. This isn't just some sort of flash in the pan thing. This is something we've been talking about for over 500 years now. So we also have a lot of people in our communities who share the values of the ELCA, but just simply don't know that we exist. I think another part of this is actually there's a lot of community disintegration that's happened in the last probably 20 years. COVID certainly hammered this home, right? That our communities aren't as strong as they used to be. Even like before COVID hit, there was still just people don't really even talk to each other in public anymore. They don't often talk to strangers. I did this experiment in college where I tried to talk. I was feeling kind of awkward, and so I thought, all right, I'll just try and talk to every person that I'm with in the elevator with. I was on the 11th floor, so I had a lot of chances to talk with people. And I noticed within my generation, it was a lot harder to make conversation, right? When I was talking with other college students, when I was talking with a parent, no problem. Or somebody older than a parent, very easy to start a conversation. And this is just the reality, right? I can complain about it, about some sort of generational shift, but this is just the reality that we have to figure out a way to sort of rebuild these community ties that church kind of needs it, right? People are just, they go to work, they go home, they watch TV, or they scroll on social media. And then they don't spend any time building communities. So like there's a huge need in the world for what we have to offer. It's just kind of how can we offer it in a way that they can be excited about it, that people outside the church can see the real value that comes from worshiping together, the gathering for Bible study, gathering in small groups. So those are kind of some of the thoughts that I have. There's a lot of people who kind of share these values that we could pretty easily reach, but we just have to figure out how to engage in that reaching of them. I could certainly talk for a little while longer. I don't know if any of y'all have any questions about anything. I've reached the end of my notes though, so I'm trying not to I try not
Yeah.
to monologue, especially amongst other pastors. I know I can be guilty of that, but thank you for the time to speak. I hope my words have been of some use. I'd be happy to answer any questions or we can just engage in dialogue together.
Yeah, no, this is great. Thank you, Pastor Paul. Giving us a lot to think about, and I wonder, one of the things is, and you kind of lift this up, but there's a difference between like reaching people and forming people in faith, right? And how have you seen that work well in some ways, given your platform, how you've been connecting with folks online? Has there been some formation happening? Maybe not in your parish or parishes where you're serving, but maybe you have seen some. Do you see it in offline conversations or, yeah, I'll just leave that up there.
Yeah. So I go live on TikTok every Monday at 9 p.m. Central Time, and that has kind of functioned as a sort of a community gathering space for people. There's people that I recognize, right? And it's very fun when I see somebody, Sarah has mentioned a few times where it's happened where somebody has come on and they said, "Hey, am I welcome here? Like I'm an atheist." We're like, "Yeah, sure, you can be here." Like we might not agree on some stuff, but that doesn't mean that we're going to say anything bad towards you. And we start to kind of win these people over slowly over time in this low risk situation. So there is some of that. And I do offer a Bible study for folks, but I really some people have done online church and have been able to do that really well. I don't doubt that for a second. And for some people, that can be a really valuable community. I also think there's something that's really valuable about having an in-person community. And so I always try and direct people to local churches as much as I can. Like I just had somebody from Des Moines message me and it's like, "Hey, if you know of any progressive churches in Des Moines, let me know." And so I sent her 3 recommendations for ELCA churches that I was able to see, including one for a friend of mine from seminary that had recently moved. So my hope is always to connect people into local communities because I think that gives you a lot more richness, right? I Social media is so ephemeral in a lot of ways. Like I could say one thing and then somebody could say, I don't like that guy anymore, or I don't want to listen to what he has to say anymore. Whereas in person, you kind of have your relationships are a lot stickier. So you can actually be challenged in a sense by somebody in person because you've developed that relationship. So there's definitely
Yeah.
some faith formation happening. The craziest thing for me is that it does feel like the zeitgeist has shifted. And maybe it's just like TikTok is only sending people who have already seen my content to me. That very much could be the case. But when I started in 2021, like almost every single live, I spent the entire time explaining why Christians could be okay with queer people, right? Like this is
Mm,
pretty much exclusively what I talked about for like the first year of being online. And I know the people that are in the live are rotating out, but it does feel like there's been kind of a shift in the popular culture that this is actually something that's people understand. It might not be their particular viewpoint or they might not understand how it works, but they do know that that progressive Christians, that affirming Christians actually exist.
yeah. Well, yeah, I appreciate that. Just sometimes just having that out there, like on TikTok, YouTube, et cetera, wherever, it's, there needs to be some sort of public witness, right? We do have
Yep.
some role to play in the public sphere, in the public square. And so I'm going to turn to a question from the Q&A here, more of a comment. Anne says, all of what you're saying is resonating. Even though I work at an ELCA church, I know not everyone in the congregation is as accepting as I would hope. I worry about inviting new youth into our space who don't find it as welcoming as we think it is.
Mm.
But what you are saying is helpful, and it isn't about getting folks into the pews, it's about getting the word into a different space. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is a fear I've had as well, right? Like, I don't want to claim that my church is queer affirming if the members are not queer affirming, right? Because I don't want to bring somebody in and give them a negative experience necessarily. I do think what we can do is speak with members. And I've been serving smaller churches, right? So this is actually feasible in all of my churches. If you're serving a larger church with like thousands of members, this is less feasible. But to go around and speak with people, right, and try and help them understand how to be hospitable towards others. Some of that is like sometimes churches get don't know what to do with new people, and so they just like really prod and pry, or they don't interact with them at all, which is often what happens in my experience in Lutheran churches. So some of that is like coaching the members who have been there for a while, like, hey, this person is queer, like just don't ask them about this part. Like don't say anything
Mhm.
about it because I want them to feel absolutely loved here, and I'd be happy to have any conversations with you. But I want you to direct your questions towards me. So there's some of that prep work that you can do, especially if there's people where like this person is going to comment about something that they're wearing or comment about their hair or something about their appearance. I also think there's like churches don't not all members of the church have to know each other, right? And
Right.
one of the things that I think is so helpful that I have done only a handful of times, but getting when you encounter somebody, right? Trying to find another person who can build that relationship, right? So much of the time, the pastor is kind of the central hub of the church, especially if you're getting towards like the kind of program size churches. But even in sort of like single pastor size churches that aren't in that family size, but that single size, it feels like the pastor is kind of the one point of contact. And as much as we can try and diversify that and say, hey, I know, like I'm thinking of a member of mine, like, hey, I know you were a science teacher. This person also worked at the elementary school. Would you be willing to sit next to them? Right. Kind of viewing ourselves as like the center point for a connection. So that way when they encounter somebody, it's not just like it doesn't feel like their one connection is being severed as well. So that's something that I think churches could do a much better job at generally is just saying we have one person who is going to be our designated welcomer, right? And if you see someone new coming in through the door, I had this happen for at I won't name any of the churches I've served where I've had this happen, but I've had this happen where like I see a new person and I think, oh, great, this is wonderful. Like I hope they feel welcomed and maybe they'll come again, maybe they won't. That's fine. I don't want to put too much pressure on them. And I talked with the other members and they're like, yeah, we have no idea who that was. And I'm like, wow, I'm doing stuff. Like, y'all gotta go talk to
Oh, I hear you. I hear you. Well, that's
him.
that's good. What you're saying is kind of a lead into the other question that we have here that just popped up. Not that
Mm,
it's going to be the responsibility of a staff person, but are there suggestions? You mentioned, sort of this funnel where there's some things that I like to use the word, there's not a lot of friction there when you're, like it's easy to just kind of put something on something. Well, I won't say easy, but you put something out there, you're not really interacting with a person face to face. So there could be
Yep.
friction, but it's not the kind that you have like in a worship space or in a Bible study where you have to actually be around people and talk to them and engage people face to face, right? So this
Yeah.
middle space you talked about, the question is, any suggestions for creating opportunities for staff, say, to be in the middle space of that funnel?
Yeah, so I'll just note I try not to just say like, "Hey, pastors and staff, you need to do more," because that's like I've heard that advice many times before, and it's like, well, this is kind of all I got. So just I'll just name that for me. But
Yeah.
I think there is something about having some sense of visibility. This is part of the reason why I wear the collar anytime I am working as a part of the church, right? Does cause certainly some confusion for people because I'm like, well, he's married. How's that work? Like I have to do some explaining. But it has been a good tool for me because people can see me in public, right? They know that I'm affiliated with some church. I wish we had some sort of Lutheran version. We had the rough for a period of time for pastors, but I don't think that's going to come back. People are just going to think I'm at like Shakespeare in the Park or something like that. But some sort of visibility is so valuable. I know that's more available to clergy than it is to lay folks, but that's part of it. I think another part of it is just going around and asking people what is needed, right? So like I went to the school social worker and just asked like what is needed for the elementary school. And that's how I found out about this backpack program. And they're like, well, we have to send a teacher during the school day to like go get groceries at some point because this is just like they inherited the program. So I'll just take that over. And it hasn't been like a great evangelism opportunity necessarily, but it is just a way that I was able to build that trust within that area, right? I think like the classic example is having your office hours in a coffee shop and you can have like my sticker is great at this, right? I've got all sorts of Lutheran stickers on here, like being LGBTQ plus is not a set is a gift from God, right? Who a Jesus bomb and all sorts of things. You can have the classic like college sophomore laptop that's covered in bumper stickers as well. But figuring out how you can be seen and see people, I think those are great ways to build those middle spaces. The classic one is like I said, sitting in a coffee shop for a period of time. Volunteering is also a good way. This is something that I where I worry sometimes about pastors. Pastors and staff get very siloed within our churches. And I would love if we all had like within our letters of call, we had like 5 to 10% of our time that was just like used for exploring, just like meandering and like helping random people in need. Like
Amen.
we tend to fill up our schedules and then we don't spend any time walking around in our communities and observing things. So that's
Yep.
we need to go out. We like people don't come to the churches. That's just the reality. We have to go out into these spaces.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's important to be present. It's important to be in the community and build those connections. One of those middle things is something that we did when the church I was serving in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and we were joining with the Muslim community and non-denominational community, and like a whole bunch of us, just an interactive group. But it was led by our Murfreesboro Muslim youth, which was a group that we worked with. And every Thanksgiving morning, they would cook a very traditional American Thanksgiving meal. There'd be turkey, there'd be
Cool.
mashed potatoes, all the kinds of things that you might see in a typical, say, American style table, Thanksgiving meal. But we boxed them up and we went across the city to like places like first responders, right? So the police
Mhm.
stations, fire stations, EMT folks, because they had to work and they were maybe missing a meal with the family. So that it grew from the first year being like 20 meals to by the time I left there after it ran for several years, we were giving out like 300 meals. And then it keeps growing and it's a wonderful witness. And it's just, that wasn't necessarily just being about, the church. It was about being a good neighbor. And
Yep.
that's part of that building of trust. Um, One of the things that might be a challenge for us to help with our young people is to help them find their voice, right? You have
Mm.
found your voice, right? Not everybody's going to be speaking publicly,
Yep.
but I wonder, what is it like, or how could you speak to this question? What would it be to help a young person find their voice in faith without putting pressure on them to say perform or maybe even have to represent the whole church? right? I mean,
Yeah,
because you have to wrestle with that too. Like, are you representing the church? Are you representing the ELCA? Are you so you found your voice, you struggle with that, you're gonna struggle. We all struggle with that our whole life long. But for a young person, or maybe if you're working with a young person, how do you help them find that voice without putting too much pressure on them?
definitely. That's a great question, Pastor Michael. I find it so helpful to just be curious, right?
Mm.
Just try and understand what's going on, try and ask that question of why, trying to studying widely. Like I'm biased, so I just say read a lot of history books, right? Like that's what has made me the person that I am, right? Was reading about reading about Oscar Romero, reading about Dietrich
Mm.
Bonhoeffer, reading about Dorothy Day, reading about Frederick Douglass, right? These people defined who I am. So that's the way I go into this is if you're trying to figure out your voice, trying to figure out what you have to add to this, I think history is always a good place to start. Again, my bias, I know I'm biased towards it being interested in history, so that might not be a great answer for everybody. But when we think about evangelism, right, like it's a big, it's a difficult ask in the ELCA. We are not very good as a denomination at evangelism, and that's not a knock at any specific person. It is just not a part of kind of our skill sets. A lot of our churches were kind of ethnic specific churches, basically. And then those ethnicities slowly assimilated into the surrounding culture. And now suddenly we have to find ourselves like, well, we have to explain what our relationship with God does for us. So when people ask me this question about like, how do I do evangelism? The thing I just try and say is like, just talk about how it is good for you, but not in a like, what do you get from it? Right?
Mm.
Think of it as any sort of social service agency, any sort of like social community. If someone asked you to join, you would say, why? Why would I join? And like, I think a lot of our
Mm.
members would sometimes struggle to answer that question other than saying, I've been doing this for a long time. And that can be really beautiful, right? The sense of being a part of this larger tradition. But for somebody who it hasn't been a part of that larger tradition, figuring out what is the why, what keeps you going into these spaces. I think we need more young voices in the ELCA. We need more people who are willing to speak with bravery. And I I hope to try and raise up as many of those. Oh, sorry, my camera's again. I hope to raise up as many of those as I can because it is I offer, like you said, I have my particular perspective, and I'm very self-assured in that perspective, but it's not always right.
Yeah. Gotcha. That's good. I appreciate that response.
Yep.
There's another question that came up. My youth
Mm.
run our social media with guidance from a youth director. Any recommendation on how to help them grow their following? Their passion is to be hospitable and share their progressive faith. They are tired of what they hear about Christians in the news, Christians in quotes in the news,
Yeah, someone was listening to the first first quarter of the
right?
first third of my presentation. Yeah, the like real basic. We did a pastor's lab, which was designed for progressive clergy to who are interested in posting on social media, right? Not everybody's going to be doing this at the same level that myself or Pastor Reverend Geraldine was the other presenter. She's Anglican in the Church of Canada. Let's see, the Anglican Communion of Canada is the denomination she belongs to, but within the Anglican Church in Canada. And she's had also great success on social media. The things that I recommend for folks would be sorry, the things that I recommend would be thinking about some kind of hook, right? You can spend some time thinking about your equipment, right, that has some value, but also you want to center whoever your character is, right? And it could be that can be a real person, right? Like my Pastor Paul character is just me. That's just like the way that I try and voice myself. The stranger character who's wearing the gray sweatshirt and the character, the liberal who shows up in the red flannel every once in a while. Like those are characters that I've created, but I've only done three characters. So I think on social media, you do a disservice by introducing a ton of different people, right? Because then there's no sort of brand identification. So figuring out who is going to be kind of the face of it, figuring out what's your hook. Why would somebody want to watch this video? What do you have to offer them that's interesting, whether that's like entertainment or humor or something like that. But figuring out what your hook is and yeah, just see what other people are doing and what works for them. Like You could totally just copy some other sort of other progressive Christian group, or you could just copy like some conservative Christian group and just use exactly their same stuff. Like libraries have been doing this. I've seen so many of these library videos where they have somebody throw a library book at somebody's head. And then the librarian says, "Are you waiting for that library book to hit me in the head?" And then smack, it hits them in the head. And then they say something about getting a library card or something, something like that. Like that you should not feel any shame about copying what other people do. That like people do it all the time.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, let me end with this one last question. If a church really took seriously what you've learned this past year, what might look different about their youth ministry a year from
Ooh.
now, or their church a year from now?
I think a decent chunk of their youth ministry has to be outside the church.
Mm,
And you kind of have to answer for them the question of why we do church other than just like survival of the institution. That's not a very
mm.
compelling answer. I love the institution, right? Like I'll die for the ELCA, but that's not, I'm in the minority on that, even within the ELCA, right? So I think getting out of the church is part of it. Practicing the faith is part of it. Practicing prayer practices so that they have something that they're continuing. We didn't talk about that at all during the presentation, so I'm going a little bit farther, but doing stuff outside of the church walls, like that's what I would really recommend, whether that's like service projects, whether that's field trips, but any sort of
Yeah.
community good that you can do is so valuable.
Yeah, thank you for that. A phrase I heard a while ago was, if you have the church, you don't necessarily always have disciples. But if you have disciples, you're going to have the church, right?
Yep.
And anytime we gather groups of people, if we gather based on, age, if we gather based on some likenesses or whatever, it's sometimes hard to get that missional piece out there. But rather, if we find those different missional pieces that call us, we're going to get the time with each other. We're going to get the prayer time with each other. We're going to get the other pieces of time with God, time with each other. But if we start kind of inside, like you're saying, yeah, whether it's social media, whether it's just being physically present elsewhere, like getting outside of the four walls, and that being sort of a missional avenue, right? There could be many missional avenues that we take. Um, but yeah, no, it's great to hear you talk about how, what does it mean to be the church, kind of. That's kind of where you ended, it seems like. And that was really, really helpful. I know the
Yeah,
word relevant is cliche, but I think it's so important. I think that's why a lot of
yeah,
our young people maybe are not connecting with us. Um, all right. So
definitely.
any last words from you before we close out for the evening?
No, just building on what you were saying, Pastor Michael, I think if you think about it from kind of just rephrasing what I was trying to say, if we invite somebody to Bible study, right? Like why do they need to come to Bible study? Well, we think it might be good for them. We might think it might be valuable for them, but like they are not needed there. And
Mm,
one of the things, especially for young men, is this sense of duty and the sense of being needed somewhere. So like I
mm.
could go to my neighbors who are across the street and say like, "Hey, you want to come to Bible study?" And they'd be like, "No." But if I said, "Hey, we are building a float for the parade," or like we've got this fundraiser going on, like, would you be willing to help
Yes.
us do this work together?
Mm,
Like that's then they're actually needed, right? Like I don't just need you to keep my church alive. I need you because we've got this mission. And maybe they never joined the church, right? I know at
yeah.
Jacob's
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I'll finish up here real
No,
quick.
you're
But
good. You're good.
At Jacob's Well, which is now Fabric in Minneapolis, which was my internship site that changed names while I was there, which was I'm probably the only intern who has been a part of a name change process for an ELCA church. I feel pretty comfortable saying that. But we were changing the name, and we were trying to figure out this odd phenomenon that happened on Christmas Eve. We would do our service and it was great, and Pastor Greg would talk and it was fantastic. And then the week after, we would do this sandwich packing event, just partially because Pastor Greg was tired, like the staff were tired, right? We would have more people show up for that sandwich packing event the week after Christmas than we would have
Mm,
show up for Christmas,
wow.
right? These are random people who are showing up as a part
Yep.
of the community, people who we have no idea who they are, talking to each other on the Facebook event for the group. And they're like, "Hey, do you want to come to this? Like we went last year and it was really fun." Like they felt needed, right? Like they felt like they were
Yeah.
doing something there. So there's some dime into there. I still haven't quite figured out how to execute it. But yeah, I totally agree, Terry, that like friends will join for service events way more often than worship or even fun events, right? Because they're needed. Like
Yeah,
there's something tangible that they're accomplishing as well.
yeah, yeah. That makes a whole lot of sense. I appreciate that. We we I think sometimes we people don't know what they need or don't know what they're missing until there's that opportunity to serve or to step into a place that they're not familiar with. And then in retrospect, it's like, oh, were our hearts not burning with, kind of a moment of, wait a second, something was happening here. We didn't even
Yeah,
realize it, and we didn't know we needed it.
yeah.
Um, we didn't all know that we needed TikTok or or YouTube or whatever.
I didn't.
Well, we never know. We never know. But
That's true.
we go the like I can't remember his famous quote. I think it's attributed to Luther. It's sort of like we're kind of on the way, right? It's always
Mm,
we're not righteous, but becoming. This sense of we're not well, but we're kind of becoming well, and there's always this becoming. And so I think as that's one of those gifts. I think that our theology reminds us of that we are on the way, and God
definitely.
is with us. Jesus is with us, and whether it's through social media, gathering with youth, doing the ministry, men's ministry, knocking on doors, handing out cookies, whatever it is.
Yeah,
Those are it's a great opportunity to share this good news has been gifted to us, and us carrying this message in clay jars as we're just kind of doing our best to share the good news. Well, thank you so much, Pastor Paul, for being with us, for giving us some time. Um, we have another Oasis that's going to be in September. So we're still working on speakers, but September 24, 1 p.m. Eastern time, that's going to be our next Oasis event. This video will be shared with our ELC Youth Ministry Network members by email. And I just want to give Paul thanks again. Look to my team. Is there anything else we need to share, team, before we close out? Okay. Um, I will offer a word of prayer, and we'll close out our evening. Let us pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for tonight's conversation, for tonight's gift of what it means to sort of discern what does it mean to be the church, and how can we be the church out there publicly in public spaces, whether it's online or in person. Um, we are called to be a witness. We are called to be a light. Um, and we don't point to ourselves, we point to you, Lord, as the one who shows us what it means to be hospitable, to show us what it means to show kindness and love to our neighbor, to show us what it means to trust in God, to walk with us, to be with us, to be present. God is not bottled up in one place. The Spirit has moved us and is all over the place. So everywhere we go, Lord, we know that you're there with us. Help us in these Oasis events to continue to connect with one another, to continue to be renewed in our spirit as we hear from our different speakers, that we might continue to be blessed by you and blessed by those that you've gifted to us in terms of our speakers. We ask that you now, Lord, help us to go as we go our separate ways, to help us to find ways to be hospitable to others, to ways to be to know your presence and just to be with you. So once again, Lord, we ask that you watch over us as we part ways. We give you thanks for this gift of time together. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We would love to have you be a part of the ELC Youth Ministry Network. Join us for the extravaganza in January 2027. And we hope you can be a part of what we do, be a part of this ministry going forward. Thank you so much, everybody. Good night.